Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the Three Hounds. It was 12 minutes past midnight when the telephone rang, and in Wolfe's house that's never the start of anything good. If you've lived as long as I have within the walls of that brownstone on West 35th Street, you learn that calls at that hour don't involve grocery orders, dinner invitations, or inquiries about Fritz's latest culinary triumphs. No, after midnight the wires bring one of three things: corpses, criminals, or Inspector Kramer, and not a single one of them pairs well with the last swallow of milk at the bottom of my glass. I was just draining that swallow when the bell cut through the stillness like a cleaver, sharp and demanding, turning the quiet of the office into a stage for trouble. Now, you might think I'd leap for it, eager to answer, but I have a personal policy against encouraging bad news. On the first ring I stayed put. The second I frowned at the rain streaking the window. The third, I told myself Wolfe hated unanswered telephones worse than tepid beer, and that if I let it go a fourth time, I'd be paying in sarcasm for a week. So I reached out, caught the receiver, and gave it the professional snap I reserve for callers who don't know better than to disturb decent people in the middle of the night. North 35th, I said, crisp enough to sound awake, though I was still half dreaming about roast beef sandwiches. What I got in return was a gasp. Not a polite intake of air, but a desperate rush, like someone who had run a block and realized too late she'd been followed. "Please," the voice said. A woman's voice, high, breathless, expensive. You can always tell. Expensive voices don't come from subway platforms. They're bred in penthouses and polished by elocution teachers. "Please, is this Mr. Wolfe, Nero Wolfe?" "You've got the right residence," I told her, leaning back. "But he doesn't leap out of bed at midnight to chat with strangers. I'm Archie Goodwin, his right arm, left arm, and anything in between. Maybe you'd like to explain why you're calling at the witching hour." There was a tremor in the silence that followed. Then, "I'm going to die." Just that, flat and stark. She didn't say maybe, or I think, or I'm afraid. She said it the way you'd tell a cabbie to turn left at the light. "People have been predicting that with remarkable accuracy for several thousand years," I said, keeping my tone light. "Any chance you can narrow it down a little? Tonight? Next week? I like my schedules neat." "I don't have time for jokes," her voice broke into a sob. "You must help me. They'll kill me. I know they will. I can't call the police, please." Now, I've been around long enough not to let sobs sway me more than a gentle breeze, but there was something behind hers, a panic that came from the marrow, not from rehearsed melodrama. "Lady," I said, "who exactly is they? The bogeyman? The taxman? You're going to have to do better than pronouns if you want Mr. Wolfe's attention." There was a shuffle, the sound of fabric against fabric, as if she were twisting the phone cord around her hand until it cut. Then, in a whisper she might not have meant me to hear, she said, "The Three Hounds." And before I could press her, the line cracked with a slam that nearly deafened me. She was gone. I stared at the receiver, half expecting it to sprout fangs. Then I set it down with the care you give to a rattlesnake in a shoebox. Midnight calls from hysterical heiresses are one thing. Hysterical heiresses muttering about hounds are another. For 30 seconds I debated letting Wolfe sleep. He liked to rise when Fritz brought him his breakfast tray, never a moment earlier. But then I pictured the look he'd give me in the morning when I told him a woman had called about imminent death and mysterious hounds, and I decided discretion was not the better part of valor. I climbed the stairs, the carpet muffling my steps, the brownstone creaking around me under the weight of rain. Wolfe's room is his fortress. He breakfasts there, reads there, and considers any intrusion a declaration of war. But I knocked anyway. A growl came through the wood. "Confound it, Archie. If you value your position, you will not—" "Sorry to report," I cut in. "We've got ourselves a lady in distress. Midnight call. Says she's bound for the morgue, can't go to the police, and dropped the words 'Three Hounds' before hanging up. Sound like your kind of lullaby?" There was a silence in which I could practically hear his lips purse. Then the reluctant scrape of bed springs. "Bring me details." Details are scarce. I've got a voice that dripped money and panic, a refusal to call the cops, and an ominous reference to canine companions. Do I fetch Fritz to start breakfast early? Pfui! Leave Fritz in peace. His voice settled into the gravelly resignation of a man denied sleep. Return to the office. I will attend. That last part, I will attend, wasn't to be taken lightly. Wolfe attending to anything after midnight meant the world had tilted. I went back down, turned up the desk lamp, and 5 minutes later he entered, immense in his silk robe, the belt strained around him like a truce line. His eyes were half shut, but his brain wasn't. He lowered himself into the yellow chair which creaked in recognition of its master, and fixed me with the look of a man determined to make me regret existing. "Repeat," he said. I did, word for word, minus my jokes. He listened, chin tucked, fingers steepled against his stomach. When I reached the part about the 3 hounds, his eyes opened another fraction. "Hounds," he said, "plural, specific." "That's right." Sounded like she was naming her executioners. "Or describing them," he murmured. "Mr. Goodwin, you are aware I disdain nocturnal hysteria. It cloys. It is unreliable." "Sure, but panic can be informative. She wasn't faking." "Perhaps." He exhaled through his nose, which is a trick of his that can silence a room faster than a pistol. "Nonetheless, we cannot gallivant through the night on the basis of a strangled phrase. She requested assistance tomorrow?" "She didn't request anything so politely. She hung up. But if you want my guess, she'll be at the door once the sun's up, with her checkbook trembling in her hand." Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the beer cabinet, but even he drew the line at pouring one before dawn. "Then we shall see. For now, bed. We will entertain this Miss—" What name did she give? "Didn't, unless help me as a surname." "Intolerable." He closed his eyes. "Very well. You may inform her, when she calls again, that she may come at 11. "She'll love the sleeping-in policy," I said. "Meanwhile, what about the hounds?" "What about them?" "They don't sound like greyhounds at the track. More like the hellish variety." He opened his eyes just long enough to level them at me. "Archie, go to bed." I did, but not before pouring myself another glass of milk, because you can't argue with a man who thinks in Latin half the time and quotes Pliny the Elder for sport. I carried the glass upstairs, listening to the rain drum its verdict on the roof, and wondering who Lila Garrison, though I didn't know her name yet, was, and why she thought midnight was the right time to enlist Nero Wolfe in her troubles. The brownstone, solid and smug, kept the storm outside, but I knew the storm had already found a way in. Morning in the brownstone arrives the way Wolfe prefers it, not with trumpets, but with Fritz padding softly upstairs to deliver the breakfast tray. 9 o'clock sharp, a small ritual of orange juice, eggs and corn muffins that would have been fit for a monarch if the monarch in question enjoyed the comfort of eating in bed while dictating to no one but himself. By the time Wolfe disappears into the plant rooms for his sacred 2 hours with the orchids, the rest of the city is already roaring into the day. I was downstairs in the office, catching up on correspondence that Wolfe refused to touch and sipping coffee Fritz had set aside for me. I'd had about enough of balancing Wolfe's accounts when the doorbell rang at 11 on the dot. Since Fritz never answers, I went. She was there, exactly as predicted, tall, slim, and dressed in a coat that whispered mink. Her eyes had shadows beneath them, the kind you don't buy at a cosmetics counter, and her fingers twisted her handbag strap as if it had personally offended her. This was the midnight voice, now wearing lipstick and perfume strong enough to suggest she'd tried to disguise her fear with glamour. "Miss Garrison?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Lila Garrison. I have an appointment with Mr. Wolfe." "Sure you do. Come in." I led her into the office where Wolfe had already arranged himself in the yellow chair, immense and immovable, with the expression of a man who has tolerated exactly as much foolishness as the world has to offer. He inclined his head a fraction. "Miss Garrison, sit." She sat in the red leather chair opposite, perching on the edge like a sparrow ready to flee. I leaned against the corner of Wolfe's desk because I like to watch how people handle him. She fumbled with her bag, then drew a breath that carried both courage and desperation. "My father died last year," she began. "Garrison Shipping. He left me the bulk of his fortune. I thought my family would accept it, but they haven't. They circle like wolves." She glanced at Wolfe and blanched, realizing her choice of metaphor. "Forgive me." "Proceed," Wolfe said, precise and cold. "They've made it clear I don't deserve the inheritance. They've said as much to my face. But this..." She fumbled again, but her bag yielded nothing. For the past month I've received letters, anonymous, each signed with a drawing, dogs' heads, crude but unmistakable. Each one threatens me. I know they mean to kill me. Her voice quavered, and for the first time I saw the young woman under the perfume, terrified, hunted. But she was hiding something too, because fear alone doesn't make you edit your own story as you go. Wolfe lifted his brows. You have brought these letters? I couldn't, she admitted. Not today. I was afraid to carry them. I will bring them, I promise. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You expect me to take action without evidence. I hoped you would understand, she whispered. You're my last chance. Wolfe's lips compressed into a line. He hated supplication without facts the way he hated undercooked eggs. Miss Garrison, hysteria is useless. Precision is indispensable. Without a specimen, I cannot confirm or deny the import of these sketches. Bring me one of the notes. I will, she said quickly. Tomorrow. Please, just believe me for today. I was watching her hands twist her bag again, and that's when I saw it. A brooch pinned neatly to her lapel. Gold, with small inlaid gems that caught the light. Shaped like a dog's head. A hound, no less. Expensive, custom-made. Not the kind of trinket you pick up at Woolworth's. Nice piece, I said lightly. Keeps the wolves at bay? She startled, her hand rising instinctively to cover it. It was a gift. From whom? Wolfe's tone snapped like a whip. She hesitated a fraction too long. A family friend. Years ago. Wolfe grunted, which in his language is equivalent to a pistol shot. He closed his eyes as if the sight of her fluster offended him. Mr. Goodwin, note that. Miss Garrison, I will accept your case, but you will deliver one of the notes by tomorrow or our association ends. Understood? Her relief was palpable, a sudden collapse of tension in her shoulders. Yes, thank you, Mr. Wolfe, I'll bring it. Wolfe rang for Fritz, who entered silently to pour coffee. He served her first, then me, then Wolfe, who accepted his cup with the solemnity of a priest taking sacrament. Fritz departed without a word, leaving the aroma of his brew lingering. Lila sipped hers mechanically, eyes darting to the orchids above us as though they might whisper her fate. I leaned toward her, trying to keep my tone casual. Miss Garrison, I don't mean to pry, but last night you said something odd before hanging up. Something about the 3 hounds. Care to explain? Her cup rattled against the saucer. I don't remember saying that. You did. She shook her head too quickly. I was frantic. I don't know what I said. Please don't hold me to it. Indeed we shall, Wolfe rumbled. Utterances in extremis often reveal more than deliberate statements. Do not trifle with us, Miss Garrison. She stood, her nerves stretched taut. I'll bring the note tomorrow. You'll understand then. Wolfe waved a hand in dismissal. 11 o'clock, do not be late. I escorted her back to the door. Outside, the sun glittered on rain-washed streets, but she clutched her coat as though the weather were winter's worst. I watched her descend the steps and vanish into a waiting cab, her perfume still lingering in the hall. When I returned, Wolfe had already closed his eyes, fingers steepled, the coffee cooling at his elbow. Well, I asked. She is terrified, he said. But terror does not preclude calculation. She withholds. No kidding. That brooch was a beacon. Precisely. His eyes opened, dark and certain. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow she will either deliver evidence or expose herself further. Until then, do not allow your admiration for a pretty face to cloud your judgment. I'll keep my eyes open, I said, but between you and me, those hounds are starting to sound like they bite. He closed his eyes again. Pfui, bring me the notes. Then we shall see. And just like that, the office fell silent again, orchids breathing above us, and the case of the 3 hounds waiting in the wings. When you're sent uptown to check on a client who calls at midnight predicting her own funeral, you don't expect the trip to be uneventful. Still, I wasn't planning on walking into a circus with a corpse for a ringmaster. Manhattan's upper reaches have their own perfume, a blend of polished wood, discreet money, and enough polish to blind you if the lamps are set right. Lila Garrison's penthouse had it in spades. The elevator man gave me a look like he'd been waiting for excitement all week, and when the doors slid open at her floor, I found out why. The place was crawling with uniforms. Blue serge, flat feet in slick-soled shoes, the whole station house orchestra tuning up in the wrong key. A couple of neighbours hovered in the hallway like moths hoping for gossip. Inside, the scent of money battled with the sharper tang of something less pleasant: panic. I edged through the front door without bothering to flash credentials. My face has been seen at enough crime scenes to earn me a nod. The study was the main attraction. Victor Garrison, cousin and competitor to Miss Lila, had chosen the unoriginal but effective method of dying at his desk. The glass in his hand still held an inch of brandy, though his lips would never touch another drop. His head lolled at an angle that suggested conversation was permanently suspended. The room itself glittered with wealth: mahogany desk, leather-bound volumes, gilt frames. But death has a way of stripping glamour fast. Kramer was there, puffed up and chewing a cigar like it owed him money. "Goodwin," he barked as soon as he saw me. "I should have known you'd sniff around." "Morning to you too," I said. "I just dropped in for a chat. I didn't expect the guest of honour to be so quiet." "This is a police matter, not a sideshow. You tell Wolfe to keep his fat nose out of it." "Hard to do when clients insist on dialing us at midnight," I replied smoothly. "Miss Garrison happens to think someone wants her dead. Looks like somebody settled for her cousin instead." That hit home. He glared, smoke curling from his cigar. "She's upstairs, crying her eyes out. Don't think for a minute that makes her innocent." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said, though privately I noted the efficiency of suspicion. Always start with the heiress. I wandered toward the desk, careful not to step on any toes, literal or metaphorical. The glass of brandy sat there like Exhibit A, and next to it a scatter of stationery. Most of it was blank, but one scrap had been torn roughly, as though ripped from a larger sheet. Across its surface, in faint ink, was a sketch, not an artist's masterpiece, but crude lines forming what looked like a paw, 4 claws, heavy pad, a hound's paw, if I knew anything about drawings scribbled in a hurry. I slid my eyes toward Kramer, who was busy bullying a uniform. With fingers quick but innocent looking, I palmed the scrap. Not theft, just preservation. Wolfe would want it. The widow, if you could call her that, since Victor's better half hadn't yet been notified, was absent, but Lila was in the drawing room. I found her collapsed on a sofa, weeping into a handkerchief. A female officer hovered nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop. Lila looked up when she saw me, eyes wide and desperate. "You came," she whispered. "Sure," I said, keeping it light. "When a lady tells me she's marked for death, I don't hit the snooze button. Trouble is, someone else drew the short straw first." Her sobs shook harder. I didn't know it would be Victor. I thought—" She broke off, biting her lip until it turned white. "You thought it would be you," I supplied. She nodded, unable to speak. The officer shot me a warning glance, but I gave her my most innocent smile. No harm in a little conversation. "Look, Miss Garrison," I said gently, "this isn't the time to spill every secret. But tomorrow, you'd better have that note for Wolfe. He doesn't like being kept waiting, and after this morning, neither do the police." Her grip tightened on the handkerchief, knuckles bone white. "I'll bring it, I swear." I left her to her misery and returned to the study. Kramer intercepted me at the door, his face storm cloud grey. "Out, Goodwin. You and Wolfe aren't running this one." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said again, though the scrap of paper in my pocket burned hotter than a poker. "Enjoy your brandy, I hear it's murder." He growled something unprintable, and I took my leave before he tried to frisk me. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was exactly where you'd expect him. The yellow chair, orchids overhead, a chilled glass of beer at hand. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing at my expression. "You have news." "I have a corpse," I said. "Victor Garrison, penthouse study, poisoned brandy." Wolfe grunted. "As anticipated. And Miss Garrison?" "Weeping like the Mississippi in spring. Kramer's already pegged her as prime suspect. But I found this." I produced the scrap, laying it on his desk. He leaned forward, surprisingly agile for his bulk, and examined it. "A paw." "Dog's paw," I confirmed. "Hound, to be exact." He exhaled, long and thoughtful. "So, last night's hysteria was not without substance. Someone is employing this motif deliberately. Not content with threats, they enact them. Which means Lila wasn't just flapping her lips." "Indeed. The question now, Archie, is whether she is victim or architect. You will investigate." I nodded, though my mind replayed the image of her clutching that brooch shaped like a hound's head. Fear and concealment don't usually share the same handbag, but in her case they seemed inseparable. Wolfe settled back, raising his glass. The game has begun, and unpleasantly soon. We shall see whether our client survives her own prophecy. The office fell silent again, except for the clink of glass against teeth and the faint, fragrant whisper of orchids overhead. Outside, the city thrummed on, oblivious. But inside that brownstone, the case of the 3 hounds had drawn blood. Inspector Kramer has a way of announcing himself that could shake the paint off a wall. No need for Fritz to stir from the kitchen. The man doesn't ring so much as batter the bell like it owes him money. I opened the door, because I always do, and there he was, cigar jammed between his teeth, eyes red with lack of sleep, trench coat dripping from the rain still drumming on West 35th. "Where is he?" he growled, shoving past me before I could offer him a towel. "I want Wolfe, and I want him now." "Careful," I said mildly, closing the door behind him. "If you track mud on Fritz's polished floors, he'll poison your coffee, and I mean that literally." Kramer grunted something that might have been a threat or indigestion and barreled into the office. Wolfe was exactly where any betting man would have placed him. Yellow chair, shoulders like a mountain, glass of beer in hand. The orchids loomed overhead, oblivious to homicide and politics. He raised one eyebrow as Kramer stormed in, like a monarch mildly irritated by a noisy peasant. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "you are wet. Sit before you mildew." Kramer didn't sit. He paced, waving the cigar like a weapon. "Damn you, Wolfe. Every time there's a corpse, you're within smelling distance. Victor Garrison is dead, poisoned in his own penthouse, and now his precious cousin Lila, your midnight caller, is at the center of it. Don't try to tell me otherwise." "I wasn't planning to," Wolfe replied smoothly, taking a sip of his beer. "You do an admirable job of proclaiming your conclusions without aid." "She had motive," Kramer snapped. "She inherits. She had opportunity. She was right there in the building. And she had fear, which makes people sloppy. The whole thing stinks of her." "Pfui," Wolfe said. He closed his eyes, which somehow carried more disdain than shouting. "If you wish to arrest her, do so, but you'll be embarrassed. There is more here than your convenient suspect." Kramer wheeled on me. "And what about you, Goodwin? Sneaking around my crime scene, palming scraps of paper. Don't think I didn't notice. One of my men saw you near that desk." I gave him my most innocent grin. "Souvenir hunter, that's me. Pick up a little stationery, maybe sell it to collectors of morbid bric-a-brac. Honestly, Inspector, you ought to be glad I was there. I add class to your gatherings." He jabbed the cigar at me. "One of these days, Goodwin." Yes, Wolfe interrupted, eyes still shut. "One of these days. You have been saying it for a decade. Spare us. Sit." Against his better instincts, Kramer dropped heavily into the red leather chair, scowling like a man condemned. Wolfe opened his eyes again, fixing him with calm superiority. "You are blinkered, Inspector. The hound motif is deliberate. The threats were not idle. One victim has fallen, others may follow. If you insist upon framing Miss Garrison to close your case, the true hand will remain free." Kramer snorted. "Hounds. You're building castles out of doodles." "Not castles," Wolfe corrected. "Patterns. Someone is arranging these deaths with symbolism, which suggests forethought. Such a mind will not be content with one corpse." I leaned forward, enjoying the show. "Translation. You're barking up the wrong tree, Inspector. Pun intended." Kramer turned purple. "You think this is a joke? A man is dead." "I never joke about brandy gone bad," I said. "But if you want this one wrapped neatly, you'd better let Wolfe work. Otherwise you'll be stamping your feet while another body drops." Kramer's jaw worked furiously around the cigar, but he knew the rhythm. He and Wolfe had danced this waltz too often. Bluster, denial, grudging concession. Finally he growled, "Fine. You think you're so damn clever, Wolfe, prove it. But if you mislead me, I'll have Goodwin cooling his heels in a cell." "Idle threats," Wolfe murmured. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "You will begin inquiries into the Garrison finances. Map the inheritance lines. Follow the money. If one death enriches another, you will learn it." "Got it. You want the family ledger? I'll fetch it." Kramer barked a laugh without humor. "You think you'll find a trail of coins leading to a killer? It's simpler than that. The girl killed him." "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice hardening, If you insist upon narrowing your vision to the obvious, I cannot aid you. But if you permit me room to breathe, you may yet secure justice." Kramer slapped his hat against his knee, scattering rain. "Damn you! Every time I come here, I walk out more aggravated than when I came in." "That is because you persist in treating this office as a battlefield," Wolfe replied calmly. "It is not. It is a crucible. Out there you may rage. In here you will listen." For a moment, silence reigned, punctuated only by the soft tick of the desk clock and the faint hiss of rain against the windows. Then Kramer shoved the cigar back in his mouth and stood. "All right, you dig, but I'll be watching. And if your heiress client slips up, I won't hesitate." "Of course not," Wolfe said. "It is not in your nature." Kramer stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make the orchids tremble. I leaned back, folding my arms. "Well, that went well. Next time maybe we should offer him Fritz's strudel as a peace offering." Wolfe lifted his glass. "Phooey. Commence your inquiries, Archie. The inspector's wrath is irrelevant. The truth, however, is not." I nodded, already reaching for my notebook. Outside, the storm showed no sign of clearing. Inside, we had our orders. And in this house, Wolfe's orders were law. When Wolfe tells me to canvass suspects, it means one thing. I do the pounding, he does the pontificating, which is fine by me. If the world relied on Wolfe's legs to get around, crime in New York would go uninvestigated while he reclined in the yellow chair with a beer. So that morning, after a breakfast of bacon and eggs from Fritz that had nothing to do with my waistline and everything to do with Fritz's Swiss stubbornness, I set out to meet the Garrison clan. They were waiting like vultures on a fence post, and I had no doubt they'd start pecking the moment I walked into view. First on the docket was Lila's uncle, Raymond Garrison. He was an example of how money can ruin a man even faster than poverty. Raymond had dabbled in a dozen enterprises: real estate, imports, speculative rail lines, each one ending flatter than yesterday's beer. The family fortune had skipped him in favor of Lila's late father, and resentment had fermented ever since. His apartment on the Upper East Side was grand enough in architecture, but shabby in detail, rugs thinning, curtains faded, and the smell of cigars lingering without the class to back it up. He answered the door himself, surprising me. Thick-set, jowly, with eyes that tried to intimidate and landed closer to watery. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Archie Goodwin. I represent Nero Wolfe." At the name, he sneered. "That fat detective. My niece went running to him, did she? Figures. Always was dramatic." "Maybe," I said easily. "But drama tends to follow dead cousins, and Victor's not available for comment. I thought you might shed light on the family situation." He led me into a parlor where the furniture sighed under neglect. He poured himself whiskey at 11 in the morning, which said more than any words. "The family situation is simple," he said bitterly. "My brother left Lila the fortune. The rest of us got crumbs. Now Victor's dead, and I suppose the girl will soak up even more." I leaned on the mantel. "Any reason someone might want you gone instead?" His hand stilled on the glass. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just curiosity. Funny thing about your family, dogs keep cropping up. You ever keep hounds?" His mouth twisted. "Once, years ago. Tried my hand at breeding foxhounds. Another failed venture. Why?" "Just taking inventory," I said, filing that away. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't press. From Raymond's shabby grandeur, I moved to cousin Marion, a different breed entirely. Marion Holden had perfected the art of looking expensive without appearing gaudy. She met me in her Park Avenue apartment, where everything gleamed: glass tables, ivory drapes, and a crystal decanter waiting like a stage prop. Marion herself was tall, angular, with eyes that weighed you as if considering whether you were worth investment. "Mr. Goodwin," she said coolly. "I expected Wolfe to send you. He never leaves that chair of his, does he?" "Not unless the building's on fire," I said. "Even then he'd complain about drafts. I'm here to ask about your cousin Victor." "Victor was a fool," she said crisply. "A pompous fool. His death is regrettable, but hardly a tragedy. It does shift matters, though. Lila will inherit even more now. That girl has no idea what to do with money." I studied her. "And you do?" Her smile was thin as a razor. "I would have made the fortune grow, not squander it on orchids and frivolities." That barb was close enough to Wolfe's habits to make me grin. "Speaking of frivolities, You ever have anything to do with dogs? The question caught her. For just a second, her expression flickered. My husband breeds Dobermans, she said finally. Champion stock. We have a kennel on Long Island. Convenient, I said lightly. Dobermans are handsome devils. Ever draw doodles of them on threatening notes? She laughed, sharp and humorless. Really, Mr. Goodwin, if I wished to threaten Lila, I wouldn't waste time with sketches. I'd hire someone to push her off a bridge. Charming. Before I left, I noted Saul Panzer waiting across the street in his old flat cap, blending into the scenery like a lamppost with eyes. Wolfe had set him to watch Marion discreetly, which was wise. If anyone in this family had teeth, it was Marion. Last stop on the tour was Victor's widow, Elaine Garrison. She occupied a Fifth Avenue apartment that screamed morning chic, dark drapes, a vase of lilies, and the faint smell of cigarettes curling through the air. Elaine was beautiful in the calculated way of women who understood angles better than architects. She wore black silk that flattered every curve, and her eyes were red-rimmed but alert, which suggested grief hadn't dulled her awareness. "I shouldn't even be speaking to you," she murmured, ushering me inside. "The police said—" "Forget the police," I said. "I'm here on Wolfe's behalf. He wants to know what kind of enemies your husband had." She sighed dramatically, sinking into a chaise. Victor was surrounded by enemies. He made them everywhere he went. But family is the worst. Raymond despised him. Marion envied him. And Lila, well, Lila had the most to gain from his death. That refrain was getting tiresome. "What about you, Mrs. Garrison? What do you gain?" Her smile was languid, dangerous. "A widow's share. But don't look at me like that, Mr. Goodwin. I adored my husband." I didn't comment. Instead, my eyes drifted to the mantel where a collection of small figurines rested. Dogs, all of them. Greyhounds, terriers, setters carved in ivory and bronze. I raised an eyebrow. Nice menagerie. She followed my gaze. Victor loved dogs. He invested in racing kennels once. A disaster, of course. But he kept the trophies. I filed it away. That made 3 relatives, 3 dog connections. Coincidence was packing its bags and leaving town. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, orchids having had their daily devotions. He lifted his head as I entered. "Report." I sank into my chair. Uncle Raymond, bitter and broke, once tried breeding foxhounds. Cousin Marion, cold as winter, married to a Doberman breeder. And Victor's widow has a mantle full of canine figurines and a dead husband with a racing history. That's 3 out of 3, all barking. Wolfe grunted, eyes narrowing. "So, the 3 hounds may be literal, each tied by fortune or folly to the symbol. Which means our midnight caller wasn't spouting poetry. She was describing a pattern." He leaned back, fingers steepled, and reached for his beer. "The hounds are circling Archie, and somewhere among them is the hand that feeds." I raised my glass of milk in salute. "Then I'll keep sniffing, but if you ask me, they all look hungry enough to bite." Evening shadows have a way of making Wolfe's office look more like a courtroom than a study. The desk lamp throws a cone of light that turns his yellow chair into a throne and the red client chairs into the defendant's dock. That night, rain pressed steady fingers against the glass, and the orchids above us exhaled their sweet indifference. I was nursing a glass of milk and thinking about what excuse Fritz might accept for a midnight sandwich when the bell rang. As usual, Fritz didn't stir. He never does. I went to the door and found Lila Garrison on the stoop, drenched in perfume strong enough to fight off the storm but not her nerves. Her eyes were wide, the kind that looked for monsters in every shadow. She clutched her handbag like it was her last ally. "I had to come," she whispered as I let her in. "I couldn't sleep, not with this in the house." She followed me into the office where Wolfe sat waiting, robe exchanged for a dark suit that made him look more immovable than usual. He didn't rise. He rarely does. He merely gestured at the chair opposite. "Sit, Miss Garrison. You have brought me something." She nodded quickly, fumbling with her bag until her trembling hands produced a folded sheet. I could smell the ink before she placed it on the desk. Wolfe didn't touch it at first. He studied her instead, eyes hooded. Finally, with the care of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond, he unfolded the paper. The sketch was crude, but the intent was clear. A dog's head, black ink scrawled with an unsteady hand. Beneath it, the words, "Next is the Black Hound." Wolfe's brows lifted, the only sign of animation. He set the note flat on the desk and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Archie," he said without looking at me, "observe." "I see it," I replied. "Not a masterpiece, but it gets the point across. Somebody's handwriting stinks as bad as their sense of humour." Lila twisted her handkerchief until it nearly tore. "They mean me," she said in a rush. "They must. They'll kill me next." Wolfe's voice cut through her panic like a scalpel. "No, madam, they do not mean you. They have no need to tell you you are next. This is sequential, structured, a pattern." He tapped the words with one finger. "The Black Hound. It refers to someone specific." She stared at him, lost. "But who?" I leaned forward, the connection sliding into place. "Marion's husband. He breeds black Dobermans, doesn't he? Champion stock. Sounds like a black hound to me." Lila gasped, covering her mouth. "You think he's in danger?" "I think," I said, "that whoever's writing these notes isn't just doodling. They're working their way through a list, one cousin at a time. Victor got his last drink, and now the kennel man may be getting his." Her hands shook so badly she nearly spilled her handbag. Wolfe watched her with cool detachment, sipping his beer before pronouncing judgment. "Miss Garrison, hysteria will not aid you. Calm yourself. This is not a prophecy of your death, but a declaration of intent aimed at another. The notes are sequential, each victim linked to a hound motif. First Victor, now another. The progression is unmistakable." "But it's madness," she cried. "Why dogs? Why us?" "That," Wolfe said, "is the question. Motive cloaked in symbol. Whoever wields this pen intends more than murder. They intend message. And you, Miss Garrison, are both participant and target, whether of violence or manipulation." Her eyes brimmed and she clutched the arm of the chair. I moved to steady her, but she shook her head fiercely. "I can't bear it. My family's tearing apart and I—" She broke off, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Compose yourself," Wolfe said firmly. "Archie, brandy." I poured her a measure from the decanter, though I noted the irony given Victor's fate. She drank it in a gulp, colour returning faintly to her cheeks. Wolfe folded the note carefully and placed it on the blotter. "This will remain here. I will compare the ink and paper with the scrap you secured earlier, Archie. Consistency will prove authorship. Meanwhile, we must anticipate the next strike." I glanced at Lila. "You'd better warn your cousin Marion. If her husband's the Black Hound, he's got a bullseye painted on him." Lila shuddered. "She despises me. She'll never believe me." "Then let Wolfe do the believing," I said. "That's his specialty." She looked at Wolfe, hope and dread mingling in her expression. He met her gaze without mercy. "Miss Garrison, you have embroiled me in a matter that may claim lives. You will cooperate fully, with candour. No more evasions. If you possess knowledge you have withheld, disclose it." She hesitated, lips parting, then closed them again. "I've told you everything," she whispered. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, which was his version of a gavel strike. "So you insist. Very well. Archie, see Miss Garrison to the door. She is not to be left alone until tomorrow." I walked her out, her perfume trailing behind her like a plea. When the door shut, I returned to find Wolfe staring at the note as if it might sprout fangs. "Well?" I asked. He tapped the words with one thick finger. "Sequential, deliberate, and theatrical. Our adversary is no lunatic. He is a planner. The next corpse, if unprevented, will be Marion Holden's husband. And once again, the inspector will blunder about while we sift truth from spectacle." He drained his glass, the orchids above swaying in silent witness. I finished my milk, though it did less for my nerves. Outside, the rain quickened, and I had the uncomfortable certainty that somewhere the Black Hound was already marked. When you spend enough years in New York working for Nero Wolfe, you get used to bad news travelling faster than taxis in a rainstorm. The second strike didn't wait for daylight. It came pounding on the brownstone's front door just as Fritz was finishing dinner service, and I was halfway through a glass of milk that was supposed to carry me peacefully into the evening. The pounding wasn't polite, and it wasn't the kind Wolfe could ignore. I opened the door to find a uniform, rain dripping from his cap. His expression had the grim finality of a man who's just seen another body. "Inspector Kramer wants you at the Holden Kennels," he said. "It's bad." Bad was an understatement. By the time I reached Long Island, fog had rolled in like smoke from a 5-alarm fire. The Holden property was a sprawl of fences and sheds, each one alive with the sound of Dobermans howling their grief and fury. Lanterns bobbed against the mist as uniforms tried to corral both the dogs and the chaos. The smell hit first: wet earth, animal musk, and the sour tang of something worse, poison mixed with death. Kramer was in the middle of it, his trench coat flapping, cigar clenched so hard it looked ready to splinter. He spotted me through the fog and let out a bellow. "Goodwin! I knew if Wolfe had his fat fingers in this, you wouldn't be far behind. Get over here." I picked my way across the yard, mud sucking at my shoes. When I got close enough, the scene snapped into grim focus. Marion's husband lay sprawled near the kennel gate, his face slack, his body contorted in the ugly stillness of sudden death. His hands bore scratches, the kind dogs leave when panic mixes with frenzy. But the coroner's assistant was already muttering the truth. The man had been poisoned first. The dogs had mauled him afterward, whipped into a frenzy by whatever stink clung to his body. "Another accident?" I asked dryly. "Another lunatic, more like," Kramer barked. "First the cousin with poisoned brandy, now this. Poison and dogs. Some nuts running loose with a bestiary in his head." "Or a plan," I said. He scowled. "Don't start, Goodwin. This isn't Wolfe's drawing room lecture circuit. This is blood in the mud." I let him vent while I looked around. The fog curled low, catching on the kennels. The dogs barked themselves hoarse, eyes wild in the lantern glow. A few officers struggled to calm them, but the animals weren't listening. That's when I spotted it. A scrap, half buried near the fence line. A glove. Black leather, slick with mud, one finger torn. I picked it up carefully. The leather was smeared with ink, and across the palm was the faint outline of another drawing. A hound, claws exaggerated, teeth bared. "Well, well," I murmured. Kramer stomped over. "What's that?" "Fashion accessory," I said. "A lady's glove, unless your boys on the force have taken to carrying them." He grabbed it, peered at the mark, and let out a grunt. "Damn scribbles again. This is what I'm talking about. A lunatic leaving doodles at the scene like it's a calling card." "Or like it's a signature," I corrected. "Somebody wants us to see a theme. It's not random, it's orchestrated." "Orchestrated my foot," he growled. "It's insanity. You tell Wolfe from me that if he tries to spin this into one of his fat theories, I'll—" He stopped short because we both knew the threat was empty. He needed Wolfe whether he admitted it or not. I crouched near the body, noting the details. The dead man's lips were discoloured, a sign of poison. His jacket pocket was turned inside out, as though someone had rifled through it. His watch remained on his wrist, but the chain of his fob was broken, dangling loose. I didn't touch anything. I've learned not to make Kramer foam at the mouth more than necessary. But I made mental notes. Wolfe would want every crumb. Marion appeared then, cutting through the fog like an icicle on legs. She wore a long black coat over silk, her hair perfectly coiffed even with tragedy snapping at her heels. Her face was pale but controlled, eyes gleaming with cold fire. "You," she hissed when she saw me. "I knew Wolfe would send someone. Is this what you wanted? My husband torn apart like an animal?" I held up a hand. "Easy, Mrs. Holden. No one wanted this except whoever planned it. And judging by the glove, someone planned it very well." She recoiled when Kramer showed her the evidence, her lips tightening. "I've never seen that before." "Sure you haven't," he muttered. I cut in before sparks lit the fog. "Mrs. Holden, did your husband receive any threats? Notes, drawings?" Her eyes flickered. Too quick. "No, nothing like that." Which meant yes, of course. I filed it away. The dogs kept howling, their shapes lunging against the wire mesh as if they were trying to tell us something we were too dumb to hear. The lantern light danced across their sleek bodies, shadows stretching long and menacing. The whole place felt like a stage set for a nightmare, and the curtain had just gone up. Kramer barked more orders, his men combing the yard for additional scraps. They found nothing, just mud, paw prints, and one glove with a hound drawn in ink. That was enough for me. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, beer at his elbow, orchids above him, eyes shut in thought. He opened them when I laid the glove on his blotter. "Poisoned," I reported. "Mauled after death." The kennel yard was a symphony of barking. The glove was planted, no doubt about it. Inked hound's head, another calling card. Wolfe turned the glove over delicately, lips pursed. So, sequential indeed, the second hound has fallen. Kramer's calling it lunacy. Kramer, Wolfe said flatly, is an intelligent man who occasionally succumbs to impatience. No lunatic arranges symbols with such method. This is orchestration. I leaned against the desk. Then we've got one left. 3 hounds, 2 down. Precisely. He sipped his beer, then set it down. Archie, the killer pursues a theme. Such indulgence reveals personality as surely as handwriting. Find the motive beneath the motif. Easier said than done, I muttered. Pfui, everything worth doing is easier said than done. Begin. I left him to his orchids and his beer, but the image of that glove and the inked hound clawed at me all the way upstairs. Outside, the city slept under fog and rain. Inside, the brownstone held its breath. Somewhere out there, the last hound was waiting its turn. The brownstone has a way of turning into a fortress when trouble presses in from the outside. That night, after the kennel fiasco, it felt more like a war room. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked with grime and the city lights smeared across the glass. Inside, Fritz was humming to himself in the kitchen, the faint smell of veal stock drifting up the stairs. It was his way of insisting life continue with dignity, no matter how many bodies were piling up in the family garrison. I came into the office carrying mud on my shoes and a pocket full of notes. Wolfe was already there, of course, throned in the yellow chair with his first evening beer. The desk lamp carved a bright island on the blotter, the rest of the room shadowed like the wings of a stage. He gestured without looking up. Report. I gave it to him straight. The kennel yard, the poisoned husband, the howling Dobermans, the glove with the inked hound's head. He listened with his eyes shut, his lips tightening at intervals as though tasting the bitterness himself. When I finished, he sighed. Sequential, he murmured. One cousin dead, another husband dispatched. The symbols accumulate. Yeah, I said, dropping into my chair. It's like a kid's rhyme, only with corpses for punctuation. He opened his eyes and fixed me with that steady glare that usually precedes orders. We require ledgers, inheritance records. You will fetch them. Fetch? I said. Like a retriever? Inspector Kramer's already chewing furniture about me sniffing around. You want me to waltz into the garrison accounts and start flipping pages? Yes. He lifted the beer and drank, savouring the cold. Money is the axis of this wheel. Every death shifts the balance. We must see precisely how. I leaned back, lacing my fingers behind my head. You're saying this isn't just some lunatic doodling hounds for fun. You think it's arithmetic. Kill one cousin, the pie slices change. Kill another, the pie gets sweeter. That it? Precisely. His eyes gleamed. It is not whimsy, Archie. It is calculation. Someone is eliminating rivals under cover of theatrics. I frowned. Hold on. You're not suggesting Lila, are you? She's the one who called us. She sounded ready to collapse. Wolfe's mouth twisted. Emotion is not evidence. A frightened woman may still be a murderess. Indeed, terror can be cultivated for effect. Consider, she inherits more with each passing death. The progression enriches her exponentially. I sat forward, annoyed. Come on, boss, I saw her shaking. I saw her clutching that handkerchief like it was a lifeline. If she's acting, she's good enough for Broadway. Pfui, he waved a hand. You are impressionable, Archie. You prefer to see virtue where calculation lurks. It is my business to mistrust appearances. The orchids above us swayed faintly, stirred by a draught. They seemed to agree with him. Smug little blossoms. I poured myself a glass of milk from the side table and drank half, trying to keep my temper. All right, I said finally. Say she's the mastermind. Why bother calling you at midnight, screaming about hounds? Why put herself in the spotlight? To inoculate herself, Wolfe replied. By creating the impression of victimhood, she deflects suspicion. She enlists me as her unwitting advocate. It is shrewd. I snorted. Or it's genuine panic. His brows rose. And what, pray, would you prefer? That she is innocent and the murderer remains unidentified, or that she is guilty and her tears are false? Either way, she is central. I didn't answer, mostly because I hated conceding when he boxed me in like that. Instead, I dragged out my notes and laid them on the desk. Here's what I saw tonight. The husband's jacket pocket was turned out. Somebody rifled him after he went down. His watch was left, but his fob chain was broken. That glove with the ink, placed just so. None of that says random. It screams orchestration. If it's Lila, she's got nerves of steel under all that perfume. Indeed. Wolfe reached for the glove I'd brought earlier, still resting on the blotter. He turned it over with a fingertip. Sequential, deliberate, symbolic. The progression of the Hounds. First Victor, now Marion's husband. Who remains? The uncle, I said grimly. Raymond, bitter, broke, and barking about foxhounds. He's still on the board. Wolfe nodded. Then he is the third hound, unless of course the scheme is broader. But we must assume for now the trio completes the circle. I drained the rest of my milk and set the glass down with a thump. So tomorrow I go digging through the garrison finances. I'll have to charm a banker or two, maybe grease a palm. You'll sit here with your orchids and your beer while I dodge Kramer's men. Yes. His tone was final, immovable. You will also watch Miss Garrison closely. Her distress, whether genuine or contrived, is the fulcrum. I shook my head. You never give a girl the benefit of the doubt, do you? I give no one the benefit of the doubt, he said coldly. That is why I endure. The clock on the mantel ticked on, measuring the silence that followed. Fritz's footsteps padded faintly in the hall as he prepared for the 8 o'clock dinner ritual. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the arithmetic of death unfolding in one gilded family. Finally, Wolfe exhaled and leaned back, eyes half closed. Bring me the ledgers, Archie. The truth lies not in tears or theatrics, but in numbers. They will tell us who gains most from these hounds' demise. I stood, grabbing my coat. Fine, I'll fetch the math, but if you're wrong about Lila, don't expect me to say, I told you so politely. He opened his eyes and gave me the faintest hint of a smile. You never do. I left him there, surrounded by orchids and the glow of the lamp, beer glass half drained, already lost in the maze of figures only he could arrange into a net. Wolfe's web was tightening, and sooner or later one of those garrisons was going to find themselves caught square in the middle. You don't have to be a genius like Wolfe to know that a widow in Manhattan can play grief any way she pleases. Some wear black and fade into the wallpaper, others polish their fingernails and treat the funeral as a fashion show. Elaine Garrison, late Victor's better half, though not by much, was the kind that could blend both. I headed to her apartment with Wolfe's instructions rattling in my ears. Ascertain her knowledge. Extract facts. Ignore frivolity. Easy for him to say, anchored in his yellow chair with Fritz's veal cutlets on the way. I was the one expected to spar with a woman who could make grief look glamorous. Her Fifth Avenue apartment did not disappoint. The doorman gave me the once-over like I was a stray dog tracking mud through the lobby, but a quick flash of my name and Wolfe's got me upstairs. Elaine's door opened before I touched the bell. She stood framed in the archway, a black silk gown draped like a second skin, cigarette holder poised at an angle that made smoke curl theatrically toward the ceiling. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, low and smooth, with enough velvet in her voice to reupholster Wolfe's entire office. "I thought you might come." "You're psychic," I told her. "Mind if I step in before the neighbours start wondering why the widow's entertaining men at twilight?" She smiled faintly and moved aside. The living room was richly appointed, Persian rugs, heavy velvet drapes, gilt-framed mirrors catching the lamplight. The smell of roses battled with cigarette smoke, neither winning. I sat on the edge of a chair that looked too delicate for men over 150. She draped herself on the chaise, one arm curved like a question mark. "You represent Mr. Wolfe," she said. "What does he want from me?" "Information. He's big on that. You can keep the glamour, but the facts come to me." Her eyes glimmered through the smoke. "Victor kept secrets, Mr. Goodwin. Nasty ones. He was blackmailing Lila." That cut through the atmosphere like a razor. "Lila? Your grieving cousin? What could he hold over her?" "Her father's will." She tapped ash delicately into a tray. There were clauses, ambiguities, enough to cast doubt on her full inheritance. Victor found evidence and he made sure she knew it. He bled her, slowly. Money, favours, influence. I kept my tone casual, though the revelation was anything but. "Any proof?" She reached into the drawer of a side table and drew out a folded slip. A receipt. Safe deposit box in Victor's name. Box 314 at the Midtown Trust. That's where he kept the original documents. I took it, tucking it away without letting triumph show. "You're very generous with secrets for a woman in mourning." Her lips curved. Morning can be a bore. Secrets make it interesting. She leaned closer, smoke trailing from her lips. Her perfume hit me harder than the cigarette. If she was trying to throw me off balance, it was working. But Wolfe hadn't raised me to fold under batting eyelashes. "Tell me something," I said. "Those dog sketches that keep showing up. Lila brought us one, Victor had another on his desk, and the kennel scene produced a glove with a doodle. What do you know about them?" Her eyes narrowed for just a second, too fast for amateurs, but not for me. "I don't know what you mean," she said, too smoothly. "Come on," I pressed. "Police didn't announce them, but you just flinched like a boxer who knew the punch was coming." She smiled again, but this one had edges. "Perhaps Victor mentioned them. He liked to talk in riddles when he drank." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you knew more than you were supposed to. Careless knowledge has a way of slipping out." She exhaled smoke in my direction. "You're clever, Mr. Goodwin. More clever than I expected. I see why Wolfe keeps you around." I didn't rise to the bait. "Save the compliments for later. For now, I need details. What exactly did Victor have in that deposit box?" She shrugged elegantly, bare shoulders gleaming in the lamplight. "He never told me precisely, only that it could ruin Lila. Enough to keep her docile while he skimmed. Perhaps letters, perhaps an amended clause. I never saw them, but I know they exist." I filed it away, careful to keep my poker face. If true, it meant Lila's panic wasn't just hysteria, it was desperation under siege. Elaine leaned closer again, her perfume wrapping around her words. "Do you know what I think, Mr. Goodwin? I think whoever killed Victor also took those documents. The dogs, the symbols, their smoke screens. The truth is about money." "That's Wolfe's department," I said. "He's a fanatic for arithmetic. I just follow the crumbs." "And flirt with widows," she said with a sly smile. I stood, pocketing the receipt. "Only when they flirt first." Her laughter followed me to the door, low and dangerous. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, orchids breathing above him, beer glass sweating on the desk. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing when he saw the slip of paper I laid before him. "A safe deposit receipt," I said. "Victor was blackmailing Lila, over the will." Elaine handed it over like a party favour. Wolfe examined it, lips pursed. "So, that explains the midnight terror. Not merely threats of death, but extortion layered upon inheritance." "There's more," I added. She slipped. She knew about the dog notes before anyone told her. Claimed Victor babbled in riddles, but it smelled like knowledge she shouldn't have. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "Interesting. The widow's gambit. She presents herself as Confederate while planting suspicion elsewhere. Dangerous." "Not to mention she nearly strangled me with perfume," I said, pouring myself milk. "If I'm going to keep sparring with her, I'll need hazard pay." "Phooey," Wolfe lifted his beer. "Hazard pay is earned by results, not perfume. The safe deposit box is critical. Tomorrow, Archie, you will secure its contents. Meanwhile, we watch the widow closely. She plays her hand too freely." The orchids swayed above us, silent witnesses to another layer of intrigue. I drank my milk, staring at the lamplight on the desk. The case wasn't just about hounds anymore. It was about money, secrets, and a widow who knew more than she let on. I poured myself a glass of milk and raised it. "To you, Wolfe. You may not leave the house, but you sure know how to bring the pack to heel." He closed his eyes, content. "Phooey, drink your milk." In New York, bad news doesn't knock politely. It barges in with a brass band and a drum roll. This one arrived just after lunch, while Wolfe was pushing back from the dining table, replete from Fritz's rabbit ragout, and already contemplating his afternoon orchids. The telephone rang with the urgency of a man being chased, and I grabbed it on the third ring. The voice on the other end belonged to a detective from Midtown South, and it carried the flat tone of someone sick of death. "Archie Goodwin, you'd better tell your boss the last Garrison hound just went down. Raymond collapsed at his club after a whiskey. Doc says arsenic. We've got a dead uncle and a room full of angry bankers." I muttered thanks and hung up, then turned to Wolfe. He hadn't moved. He never does unless forced by geology. His eyes were closed, but I knew he'd heard every word. "Raymond Garrison," I said, collapsed over his whiskey. "Arsenic in the rocks." Wolfe opened his eyes and exhaled through his nose. "So, the sequence completes." "Completes?" I said. Try accelerates. Somebody's running through relatives like a subway turnstile. He didn't rise to the bait. He merely gestured toward the office, and I followed him in. By the time he sank into his yellow chair, the orchids above us were swaying faintly, Fritz's footsteps soft in the hall. The brownstone felt smaller, like the walls were leaning in. I hadn't even finished pouring myself a glass of milk before the front door slammed open. Inspector Kramer stormed in, trench coat dripping, cigar clenched. He looked ready to throttle the first man in his path, and since I was standing, that man might have been me. 3, he roared. 3 corpses in as many days, and what do I get? Fairy tales about hounds from you two. Raymond Garrison's dead in his club chair, poisoned like the rest. And I'm done waiting. The girl's coming in, tonight. Wolfe didn't blink. Phooey. Arresting Miss Garrison would be asinine. Asinine? Kramer spat the word. She profits from every death. She called you, planted her act, and sat back while her family dropped like flies. What more do you want? I want evidence, Wolfe said, his voice cutting through the room like steel. Not bluster. Kramer slammed a fist onto the desk, rattling the beer glass. Evidence? You've had notes, drawings, a damn glove smeared with scribbles. How much evidence does a fat man need? Those are signatures, not proofs, Wolfe said calmly, and they were not hers. The 2 men glared across the desk, smoke from Kramer's cigar twisting in the lamplight. I broke the silence. Inspector, Wolfe's right on one thing. Lila may be a lot of things, frightened, evasive, even desperate, but I don't buy her as mastermind. She was too raw, too rattled. Elaine, on the other hand, Kramer whipped around. The widow? Yeah, I said. She slipped with me. Talked about the dog notes before the police ever mentioned them. Claimed Victor muttered riddles. But nobody else knew. She was too quick with that knowledge. Wolfe inclined his head, eyes half closed. Precisely. Her gambit was to offer Archie a safe deposit receipt, presenting herself as helpful while steering suspicion toward Lila. But her knowledge of the dog motif betrayed her. She was too eager to control the narrative. Kramer growled, but the fight had gone out of him. So, you're telling me I've been chasing the wrong hound? You've been chasing the wrong scent, Wolfe corrected. He tapped the arm of his chair. The widow profits from Victor's silence, from Holden's absence, from Raymond's fall. She knew the notes, she controlled the access, and she sought to cloak it all in theatrics. The Houndmaster is Elaine Garrison. I thought back to her apartment, the cigarette smoke curling, the perfume thick enough to drown in, the smile that hid more than it revealed. Makes sense, I admitted. She had motive, means, and enough gall to make the whole family dance. Kramer puffed his cigar hard enough to make it glow. Then we'll see if she still smiles in a cell. I'll bring her in. Wolfe lifted his beer, the glass catching the lamplight. Do so, but do it with precision, Inspector. She is a dangerous woman, not because she is violent, but because she is clever. Treat her accordingly. Kramer muttered something unprintable, jammed his hat back on, and stormed out. The front door rattled in his wake, leaving silence in the office except for the faint rustle of orchids and the ticking clock. I drained my glass of milk. So that's it. 3 hounds down, pattern complete, Elaine unmasked, the curtain falls. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Not yet. Until she confesses, or the evidence is irrefutable, we remain vulnerable. Human cunning is never so simple. I sighed, leaning back. You know, most men would consider 3 deaths in one family a full week's work. Most men, Wolfe said, are not me. He reached for his beer again, calm as ever. I watched him, the office glowing warm against the storm still prowling outside, and I wondered how many more nights like this the city had in store. But one thing was certain, the Houndmaster's game was nearly over, and Wolfe had already set the final trap. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe in full courtroom form, you've missed a show that makes Broadway look like amateur hour. The yellow chair becomes his bench, the red client chair's the dock, and the desk lamp a gavel that strikes with every syllable. The orchids above lean like a jury, silent and impartial. And me? I play bailiff, usher, and occasional heckler, making sure the whole circus doesn't spin out of control. That evening the storm had finally broken, leaving the city washed and gleaming under a clearing sky. Inside the brownstone, Fritz had retreated to the kitchen after serving coffee strong enough to revive a corpse. though we had plenty of those already. Kramer was planted to Wolfe's left, cigar clamped, jaw set. Across from us sat Elaine Garrison in her silks and smoke, still trying to look like grief incarnate with just enough glamour to sell it. Wolfe began without preamble, his voice heavy and precise. "Mrs. Garrison, this charade ends tonight. 3 deaths are tethered by a common motif, the sequence of Hounds. The perpetrator employed ink, notes, and theatrics to distract from motive. But the arithmetic of inheritance, the evidence of your knowledge, and the physical trace of your glove unmask you. You are the Houndmaster." Elaine gave a low laugh, brittle as glass. "Accusations in your parlour don't make them true." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "truth emerges most clearly here, in my parlour, under scrutiny. You knew of the dog sketches before the police spoke of them. That is impossible unless you authored them. You presented Archie with Victor's safe deposit receipt, pretending to aid, but thereby revealing access you should never have had. And this?" He gestured, and I placed the glove on the blotter. A woman's glove, ink-stained, planted at the kennel to extend the motif. "Your glove, madam." She stiffened, though the cigarette holder never trembled. "Circumstantial," Kramer barked, smoke puffing like a locomotive. "Circumstantial hell! You slipped, lady. I heard the report from Goodwin. You knew too much too soon." Elaine's eyes flashed, then narrowed. "And if I did? Knowing is not killing." Wolfe leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "But you had both motive and method. Victor's blackmail endangered your comfort. His death freed you. Holden's death silenced a man who might contest your influence. Raymond's death finalized the division, each poisoned, each cloaked in canine pageantry to suggest lunacy. It is not lunacy, Mrs. Garrison. It is orchestration, and it is yours." The silence thickened until even the orchids seemed to hold their breath. Elaine's lips parted, a protest forming, but it faltered. She looked at me, perhaps hoping charm might turn the tide. I gave her nothing but steady eyes. Finally she exhaled, smoke curling like surrender. "Victor was a swine. He deserved it. He bled me, mocked me, and thought me weak. I showed him otherwise. The others—" She broke off, then lifted her chin. "Collateral, necessary. Do you think I regret it? I regret nothing." Kramer surged up, cuffs ready. "That's enough for me. You're done, lady." Elaine rose with languid grace, still every inch the socialite. "So, I lose to orchids and beer. How fitting." Kramer snapped the cuffs, his voice gruff but carrying a note of respect. "For once, Wolfe, you delivered the whole package without making me tear my hair out. Damn fine job." Wolfe inclined his head, already reaching for his beer. The case was plain once the sequence revealed itself. Symbols betray their author more surely than fingerprints. As the door shut behind them, silence returned, broken only by the clock's tick and the faint hum from the kitchen. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed, savouring victory with his beer. I finished my coffee and stood. "Well, that's that. 3 hounds down, 1 widow collared. You keep your orchids, Wolfe, but I'll take the applause if it comes." "Phooey," he muttered, eyes already drifting closed. "Drink your milk." And just like that, the brownstone exhaled. Another storm passed, leaving only the scent of triumph, cigar smoke, and Fritz's veal stock lingering in the air. If there's one thing you can count on in the brownstone, it's that Nero Wolfe has no intention of letting 3 homicides, a hysterical heiress, a scheming widow, and a police inspector with a blood pressure problem interfere with his routine. The case of the 3 hounds had ended in the usual place, our office, with Wolfe pronouncing sentence like a magistrate while Kramer snapped on the cuffs. Now, a week later, the orchids had resumed their daily audience. Fritz had retreated happily to his pots and pans, and Wolfe had re-established himself as a sedentary monarch in yellow upholstery. Not that it was quiet in the city. The newspapers were still barking about the Garrison tragedies, splashing Elaine's arrest across the front page with all the lurid ink they could spare. One of them ran a headline, "Black Widow spins web of hounds." Another, "Heiress cleared, Widow confesses in Wolfe inquiry." I kept the clippings, mostly for the scrapbook I don't keep, but someday might. Lila's name had been scrubbed clean enough to make her sound like a plaster saint, though I could still remember the tremor in her voice on that midnight call. As for Elaine, the tabloids had made her into a femme fatale with enough smoke and perfume to asphyxiate the city. I'd just come back from dropping off a batch of milk bottles, my contribution to domestic life, when I found Wolfe in his chair, eyes half shut, orchids nodding above like a Greek chorus. Fritz glided in with a tray, Wolfe's chilled beer in its tall glass, my tall milk beside it. He set them down as if offering communion and retreated without a sound. "Archie," Wolfe said, opening one eye, "you are rattling about like a spoon in an empty pot. Sit." I sat, stretching out my legs. I was thinking, which is dangerous, about how dogs ended up the centerpiece of murder. Usually it's Jules or Wills or a secret lover. This time a kennel of Dobermans and doodles of Hounds. Almost makes a man wary of Lassie. Wolfe grunted. "Symbols, they are the currency of vanity. Mrs. Garrison required theatrics to mask arithmetic. She employed Hounds because they offered drama, a crude diversion." I sipped my milk. Crude or not, it fooled Kramer for a while. He was ready to haul in Lila and pat himself on the back. As if summoned by his name, the bell rang. I groaned, but duty called, so I went and opened it. There stood Inspector Kramer, cigar blazing, expression sour as vinegar. He pushed past me without asking, stomping into the office like it belonged to him. "Wolfe," he barked, "I'm not here to thank you." "Of course not," Wolfe replied smoothly. "Gratitude is a luxury you cannot afford." Kramer scowled, but he sat. "I will admit you had it right. The widow sang her piece in custody just like you said she would. Ink on her dressing table matched the notes. Handwriting analysis clinched it. She tried to spin it as performance art, but the jury won't buy that. You nailed her." Wolfe inclined his head a fraction, as if acknowledging a toast. The outcome was inevitable. Kramer chewed his cigar. "Don't get smug. You still make my life hell. You could have told me outright instead of staging a drawing room drama. You like watching me sweat." I leaned forward, grinning. "Inspector, you sweat fine on your own. Wolfe just provides the heat lamp." Kramer growled at me, but it was half-hearted. He pulled on his cigar and let smoke drift up toward the orchids. Wolfe sniffed, displeased, but didn't complain. Kramer gets a pass now and then. "You know," Kramer muttered, "I keep telling myself I'll ignore your theories, and every damn time you end up 3 moves ahead. I don't know why I bother." "Because, Inspector," Wolfe said, "truth is not served by obstinacy, and because you require results." Kramer huffed, then stood abruptly. "Fine. Enjoy your beer. Goodwin, stay out of my homicide squad's hair for a while." He stomped out, leaving smoke and irritation behind. The silence after his exit felt deeper, broken only by the ticking of the desk clock. Wolfe lifted his beer and drank, eyes closing with satisfaction. I leaned back, letting the milk settle. "There you have it, boss. The city's moved on, the inspector admits you're right, and the orchids are still blooming. Another case tied off neat. You ever think about how it feels for me, running around in fog and kennels while you sip beer and play Solomon?" He didn't open his eyes. "You are compensated." "Money isn't everything," I said. "A pat on the back once in a while wouldn't kill you." His lips twitched, the Wolfe equivalent of a belly laugh. "Phooey, you know your worth. Do not seek flattery from me." I grinned, satisfied. "All right, but I'll say this. Between Lila's hysterics, Elaine's perfume, and 3 hounds too many, I've had my fill of dog metaphors. Next case, I vote for something simple, like a body in a locked room with a dagger in his chest. No canines required." Wolfe opened his eyes at last, studying me as though I were another orchid. "You will take what comes, Archie, and you will chronicle it with your usual impertinence." I saluted with the milk glass. "To impertinence, then." Fritz reappeared to clear the tray, humming softly. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon. He was preparing something elaborate for dinner, no doubt. The brownstone had slipped back into its rhythm, as though 3 murders and a scandal had been no more disruptive than a leaky faucet. That's the thing about working here. The world may tilt, but the orchids still bloom at 9, the beer still chills at 6, and Wolfe still fills the yellow chair like an immovable fact. I leaned back, watching him close his eyes again, content in his empire of food, flowers, and logic. And I thought, not for the first time, that no matter how many garrisons fell, or how many widows tried their games, this place would endure. Outside, the city went about its business, neon signs flickering to life as night crept in. Inside, the brownstone was warm, orderly, and, at least for now, at peace. Another case closed, another storm weathered. Beer for Wolfe, milk for me, and orchids nodding approval. That was our epilogue, and it was enough.